Right, well, good evening, comrades. This is the latest in a series of fortnightly discussions online, hosted by Talking About Socialism from a Marxist point of view. I can see there's many new faces here tonight. You're all welcome. My name's Ed Potts. I'm going to be chairing the meeting. In terms of what tonight's going to look like, of course, we've got 90 minutes for the discussion. We're going to close it promptly at 9 p.m. The meeting, as with all our meetings, is being recorded. So, of course, bear that in mind. It's also going to be streamed live on YouTube and Facebook. And you'll, of course, be able to watch the meeting later back and, of course, share it with others who may be interested as well. For anybody, of course, who is watching it after the fact, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and feel free to share with others as well. The topic for this meeting tonight is your party and specifically the founding documents or draft documents which have been circulated for consultation and discussion. This was interposed into our usual schedule of meetings. There was meant to be a meeting on internationalism and foreign policy tonight, but we thought this is, of course, something that's pressing and urgent and going on now. So we thought it was useful to have a meeting on this. In terms of housekeeping and how the meeting's going to be run, I've mentioned we're going to run until 9 p.m. We're going to have an introduction to kick us off, about 10 minutes from Nick Wrack. There'll be a further contribution from Janet Sillett, I think, as well. And I will contribute a few points if there's anything that's been left out. And what we'll do then is open the floor to discussion. We welcome any and all contributions. If this is your first meeting, you're very welcome, as is your opinion and your point of view. And if you want to raise comments or questions, then you're very welcome to do so. And we, of course, we encourage you to do so. What we do aim to do in these meetings is to have contributions, at least initially, of 3 minutes each. And that's not to cut anybody short or deprive anyone of their say, but it's to make sure that all of the people in the meeting can have their say and come in, and it helps with chairing the meeting. So I will ask you to come to a stop when it's 3 minutes. Please don't be offended. It's just to make sure that everybody gets heard. So the topic of the meeting tonight is these founding documents or drafts for them that have been circulated to members of your party. They've been described as an unprecedented democratic exercise, an example of doing things differently. And of course, tonight we're going to discuss whether they actually measure up to those quite bold claims. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Nick Wrack, who's going to introduce the discussion for 10 minutes.
Thanks very much, Ed. Welcome, comrades. Particularly welcome to people who are attending their first meeting or who haven't been to a meeting for a long time. It's good to see some old faces back. We're going to discuss, as Ed's pointed, the founding documents. And I think it's important in a discussion like this that we set out where we're coming from, in the sense that this is a meeting organized by Talking About Socialism from a Marxist point of view, and therefore our criticisms or engagement with the founding documents are clearly informed by our political approach. We're Marxists, we're, if you like, communists or socialists. The two words people that attend regularly will know that we use the terms interchangeably. And we therefore differ in our approach from the solutions to the problems of the present society, from what we might call liberal socialists or reformist socialists or social democrats. And in that, I include Jeremy Corbyn and people who support his approach to politics. So that's a fundamental difference in where we're coming from in terms of approaching your party. It's clear to me that the majority of people who've signed up for your party are far, far closer to Jeremy Corbyn than they are perhaps to me and the ideas that we're putting forward here. Um, but on the question of democracy, I think there'll be many things that we share, despite the fact that we might differ over the political goals that this new party should adopt. Now, I'm going to go through some of the papers, albeit it'll have to be a bit of a rush. I know that lots of people will have read these, and if I make any mistakes or get anything wrong, or you think that I'm talking rubbish or making false claims, then please take me up and contradict me or point out where I'm going wrong. Uh, I can't claim to have mastered the content of the document. I've read the four documents about three times, quite rigorously. But I have to say, and this is despite the fact that I've been a practicing lawyer for 30 years, I found it quite difficult to get to grips with exactly how everything fits together. And this is a problem right at the heart. And it goes to the claim that Ed mentioned in the documents. It talks about approaching things differently and embarking on a democratic process that's never been seen before. Whereas in fact, I'd say the opposite. The documents are all prefaced by saying that this is a member-led party. And again, I'd say that the documents contradict that. Because if you were going to approach the founding of a conference and you were going to look at a constitution, and that's essentially what some of these, well, these documents do look at, I would say that in terms of what we've been presented by, and of the constitutional document is 9 pages, the standing orders document is 15 pages, the strategy document is 6 pages, and the political statement is 1 page. It's very good to see a strategy document. I was pleased to see that because quite often, I'd say generally, the left, including the Marxist left, doesn't really look at strategy, how it's going to get from here to there. So that's a good thing to see, although I've got some differences with the document. But the point is that if you are going to launch a democratic discussion on these papers, you would ensure that we had the time to discuss them properly, adequately, thoroughly. And where would we discuss them? In my opinion, we discuss them in branches, but there are no branches, or there are proto-branches, but they've not been formally recognized. And in terms of the conference, which is going to ratify or begin to ratify, perhaps it's going to be ratified by a membership vote, a sort of referendum or plebiscite. The conference that's going to take those decisions is the 29th and 30th of November, and that is less than 5 weeks' time. These documents went out on the 17th of October, so that's 6 weeks to look, digest, discuss, consider, and work out, if you don't agree with them, how you're going to register your disagreement. And in the documentation, it says that there will be a members portal whereby people can disagree or make suggestions, but that's not even up and running yet. Now, we published an article some time ago in Talking About Socialism, which argued that the founding conference, for all of these reasons, is premature. It should be put back. And it should be put back to allow the proto-branches to become formal branches. And it should ensure, or allow rather, the branches to discuss these documents. And it should allow these branches to send delegates, in our opinion, to the founding conference. Instead, in what is put forward as a newfangled approach that is better than anything that's been devised before, the participants in that conference over 2 days are going to be selected by lottery or sortition. Now, I'm not going to digress. There's some merit in the question of sortition where you've got agreement about things, But there's not agreement about what this party should be for, or how it should be run, how it should be structured, how democracy should be organized, and so on. So the lottery, the sortition that's going to be used to get the people to that conference is random. And they are referred to in the documentation as being delegates, but of course they're not delegates and they're not representative of anybody but themselves. So each person that's been lucky enough or unlucky enough to be selected to attend will be speaking for themselves. And as I understand it, and people correct me please if I've got this wrong, the sortition is going to have different people there over the 2 days, which means any continuity for discussion is going to be impossible. In my opinion, what's been devised is not an exercise in democracy, but an exercise in attempted control from the top, from the initiators and the inaugurators of this party, to ensure that they keep control of how things develop. And so in the proposals, until the 31st of March next year, when a new CEC, I can't remember what that stands for now, is it an executive committee? Excuse me. By the 31st of March next year, the new leadership body, which will be the CEC, this executive committee, until then, the running of the party is going to be in the hands of the independent alliance of MPs. Now, again, people may say, well, that we need some form of organisation, some form of leadership, some way of taking decisions, and so on. My argument is that there's been huge procrastination, huge deliberate obfuscation. Even at this stage, we still do not know who the members are in our own areas. So it talks about proto-branches, and now we know that there are going to be, or there are assemblies taking place. They're called deliberative assemblies. That means that they can discuss, but they're not decisive decision-making bodies. And of those assemblies, I think I've seen 22 listed on the website, but 10 of those don't even have details of when they're going to be held. So these assemblies, which are supposed to give some opportunity at least to members to participate and express their views, are not even up and running yet. And where they have taken place, in Milton Keynes and elsewhere, the reports, at least that I've had, have not been particularly positive or optimistic. What's happening in essence is that instead of giving power to the branches, where people have come together enthusiastically to set up their part of this organization in their geographical area, and where they've set about building links into the community and so on, they're being deprived of the opportunity to participate as a collective force in this process of deciding how the party is to be run. I have issues with giving the leadership of this new party to MPs who are independent, and that means that they're unaccountable. They're not accountable to anybody, even in your party. And two, at least, I have very significant disagreements with. The party documents say that this party is being launched in the socialist tradition, and it's very good that it sets that out. But the two that I'm going to name, Ayub Khan and Adnan Hussein, certainly, in my opinion, don't. One, Adnan Hussein today has, I think today or yesterday, has posted opposing demonstrations or protests against the far right and telling us all to calm down. And Ayub Khan in Birmingham called for the army to break the bin strike. Now, these people probably would not be selected as candidates for a socialist party. And it seems wrong, to me at least, that they are in control of the direction and running of the party between now and the end of March next year, which is what, some 6 months away. Branches are not going to be sanctioned until the CEC comes into position, as I understand the proposals in the documentation. I'm going to just go back. I've been very general and I've not actually gone to any of the documents. But I suppose what I've done is set out some yardsticks against which to measure the proposals in the papers. And I hope that people come in and fill out the detail. I'm not a fan or supporter of electronic voting. I think it atomizes the membership. A socialist party has to be clear what its aims are, and it has to win people to those aims, and it has to train them up into how to fight for them. We will not achieve socialism by clicking a button and voting yes or no online. We need people, members who are involved, informed, and participate in debate, where they can hear arguments for and against, where they can be swayed, where they can be won over. And what's being proposed at the moment, in my opinion, atomizes the membership and prevents them from presenting coherent, organized proposals, perhaps in opposition to the leadership. A few points that I just want to headline. The position on membership introduces ideas which raises issues about bans and prescriptions. There's going to be the permission for people who are in parties like Jamie Driscoll's Majority to join, or Pamela Fitzpatrick's Arise in Harrow to join, and to have that sorted out over the next 21 months or so. But there's a prohibition on members of other parties from joining your party. It's not clear exactly what that means. Does it mean that people who are members of the Socialist Workers' Party, or the Socialist Party, or the Revolutionary Communist Party, or the Communist Party of Great Britain are going to be prohibited from joining? In my opinion, again, we should completely oppose the idea of any bans or prescriptions. We should allow all people who want to participate in this party to join it and to fight for their ideas. And if the leadership disagree with them, they should fight their case, and the membership or whoever should fight its case. I'm going to flag up the idea of assemblies, which has been raised in the papers, which seems to me to be a completely bizarre idea, that somehow we would hand over the decision-making process to people that are not in the party. I'm going to finish with this. In the founding documents, in the political statement that is the backdrop, it says that we are a socialist party, and it's got a lot of words to back that up. But when you actually analyze it, what it says, the only time that it mentions capitalism is when it says that the party is opposed to neoliberal capitalism. That is, in my opinion, inadequate. It's not sufficient. It talks about taking key sectors of the economy into public ownership. This is an attempt, in my opinion, to recreate the Labour Party of the 1945 Labour government. And there's no possibility that that could succeed in the modern period. It didn't succeed even in 1945. And the gains of that government, the reforms of that government, have nearly all been taken away, with a few exceptions, precisely because capitalism as a system continues. So we need to ensure that the political basis upon which this constitution is built is a party that is committed not just to trying to eradicate neoliberal capitalism, but capitalism per se in its entirety, and to create a new socialist society based on the common democratic ownership of the means of production and production being organized for need, not for profit. I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nick. I could see some comrades giving a thumbs up for that last point as well. So it's good to know that we have some common ground there with people attending tonight. I'm going to call Janet in because I know that Janet has been reading these documents diligently and has some points to make about it. But comrades, if you want to start raising your virtual Zoom hands to let me know that you'd like to be called into the discussion, that would be really helpful because it's a bit difficult for me to see. If you can't do that, of course, a physical hand on your camera will do. But the virtual Zoom hands are best. So I'm going to hand over to Janet. How long would you like, Janet?
Well, my voice is going because I've got, so I don't know.
Give us as much as you feel able.
Sorry, I was going to talk about two issues, branches and the membership, which I think Nick's touched on anyway. So perhaps I won't talk about the membership, and I think it should possibly be a major issue for discussion anyway. So I'm going to talk about branches as a kind of, it seems to me, I mean, obviously it's not just symbolic because it's what they're proposing, but within what they're saying about branches, I think are some of the weaknesses of this whole constitution. And I guess we ought to stress that we're not saying any of this as a kind of destructive or wrecking or anything like that. When people are putting forward suggestions and criticisms about, particularly around democracy, there's a lot of people who then say, you know, this is a new party, you're just trying to undermine it and so on. We all want this party to succeed, even if for some of us, maybe all of you here, I don't know, we don't think it will be the party that we would ideally want. So we're not doing this in a kind of destructive fashion. But just looking at branches, I had a look at the Labour Party constitution. I was a Labour Party member twice for my sins. I don't remember it much. But I have to say, looking at what they're saying about branches, why your party is much more prescriptive than the constitution of the Labour Party. Now, we know that Starmer just didn't give a damn about the rules of the Labour Party's constitution. He just ignored it. But I'm not sure that's really the point. I think it's what is in here. And just a little bit about what they're saying. So there will be branches, which is positive, because I think at one stage it was thought Corbyn particularly wanted a much more federal organisation. So there will be branches, and they say based on a constituency. But what they're saying, and I think this is fairly fundamental to what they're saying about them, these branches will have to do two fundamental things. They'll have to undertake community organising and set up assemblies. And actually, some of the funding that will be going to these branches, we don't know how much will be going anyway, could very much depend on their activity in doing what they want them to do around these two things. So basically, it's totally unclear what community organisation means. And I have to say, talking about communities, it's such a, you know, people use it all the time when it's totally unclear. There is not a community. There are all kinds, you know, in a place, for example, there are many communities. There are many communities of interest. There are many conflicts. And I don't know if any of you have been councillors, but having been a councillor and a council leader, actually, you know how complicated, how complex the makeup of the place. And just to talk about community, they don't actually give it any, they don't describe it at all, but they're going to do it. There's no option about this. And actually, I was going to read the two most terrible garbage sentences that they talk about these, but I haven't got time, and it's just so amazing that, and I can't see it because it's on my phone and it's too small. So why are they here? Why are they saying this? And also about setting up assemblies. I think, just to be cynical, maybe for a minute, that the rest of the Constitution seems to me to be sort of taken out of the Labour Party constitution, and no doubt other major parties. It's the same sort of stuff, and actually some of it, has to be there. Others, well, maybe it doesn't. But these two things, well, these are democracy. These are the kind of the new thing, the new, we're democratic, we're about the grassroots, and so on. It's a kind of Corbyn vibe, I think. However, I don't think it came from Corbyn, just from Corbyn. And I don't know how many of you, and you may think this is irrelevant, I don't know how many of you know about Roger Hallam, the old stop oil and all that sort of stuff, and his philosophy around Assemble. I suppose I'm even biased because I think he's a cultist and I don't like his so-called philosophy, and I don't know how closely he's now involved, because nobody knows who's involved in around the leadership and around the centre of your party. So much for democracy. But he clearly was, and what he's saying and has been saying for a long time, that you should have citizens' assembly along with community organising, using sortition on the way to, and this is terribly simplistic and probably not fair on him, but moving towards a revolutionary movement. The problem with what he's saying, and not just, and what I think your party is saying, is that these assemblies are not class-based, they're not organised around the working class, they are random. Who comes to them? Who is in this community? I think they say you have to invite representatives of the community. Well, who are they? And whose voices are not heard? We know they probably won't go to assemblies. Who's going to go to assemblies? And as I said, every place has anyway competing interests. And really, as a socialist party, a left party, we shouldn't be, we should be promoting our views, our program, and promoting the interests of the class. So they give a whole range of options about assemblies, at least. They do that. And I guess we can all vote yes or no. So they talk about should assemblies have a very crucial role in policy making, or shouldn't they? I mean, there's three options, I think. So basically, in that, they're talking about outsourcing politics, really, at a local level, and actually to some extent at a national level. So whatever else I hope people do here, they're responding to the consultation, although we know that, how are we going to do that? That people vote against anything that gives assemblies any power. Now, I'm not saying, that local parties, your party branches or whatever, shouldn't be consulting with local people, shouldn't be consulting with groups of people, shouldn't be working with campaigns within, I'm going to say the communities, within, communities, within whatever. Of course not. Of course they should be doing that actively, but that is not the same as allowing a random group of people to be extremely influential in policy, in looking at potentially very difficult situations and having influence on how what the your party whatever members, what they should be thinking about it. So I think those are I think those two what they're saying is that assemblies and community organizing have to be at the core of branches. And I think, I'm not saying, I don't know what they mean by community organizing, except I know what Hallam said. So I can't say I think it's terrible, but it does seem to me it's not terribly democratic because it's not allowing branches to decide what is their priorities in terms of pursuing their manifesto and what's happening in their area. So, as I said, I'm not that keen on any of them, but it's good they're having branches, so we have to give them the thumbs up for that. Okay.
Thanks
That's it.
very much, Janet. Okay, so I'm going to start calling comrades in for the discussion. As I say, just by all means keep raising the Zoom virtual hand. It should be at the bottom of your screen. You can find it there, and that will let me keep a list of who to call in to speak. So first off, we've got Matthew, and then after that, Jeff, and then Soraya. So Matthew, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, to be brief, I think this has to be put in context, of course. I mean, we have a move by the ruling class, and particularly obviously in the US as the world hegemon, towards dictatorship under Trump. We also have, the imperialist ruling classes in particular have conducted a genocide in Gaza. And are now that is on sort of semi-pause, but can be resumed at any point. This is the context for this, and under conditions also, of course, the ruling classes have made quite clear, absolutely clear, they will not concede reforms. They ain't going to concede reforms, unless they're forced to do so. And that in that case, I mean, only in terms of granting themselves time to organise a fresh attack. They simply won't concede them. So in those terms, I mean, the actual political space for this operation is vanishingly small in terms of the politics that it's actually set up with. So this is why you see this. And I mean, that the context is important. I think the thing is, I mean, it comes down to three things, doesn't it? It comes down to democracy. And the problem is that all of these are missing from this constitution, which is a complete dog's dinner and unworkable. I mean, you look at it, it just doesn't work. It's not something you can actually work an organization with. It's a sort of sketch and so on, but it doesn't actually give you the actual mechanism that the thing actually runs on. But it doesn't have a democratic basis in it, in terms of people actually being able to change policy or evolve policy or that. Actually, policy is then evolved in the constitution to the general secretary, which is is ridiculous. Members should be making policy, and then they talk about, well, you can maybe make amendments of 400 words, which is just is an absurdity. Then they talk, accountability. Now the thing about accountability is critical. The Labour Party always avoided accountability like the plague. Of course, naturally, this does too. There is no accountability. I mean, the MPs are not accountable. The officials, there's no mechanism holding officials of the organisation accountable, in terms of the people actually work for the party. You think, well, okay, well, how is it that they're actually held to account, for what they do? How can the membership actually have some control over it? All that sort of stuff. None of that. And this sort of thing, having this central executive committee, which I mean, as the name stinks. I mean, really does. Which is sort of semi-elected and so on. There's an elected bit and runs for 2 years. I mean, there's no the mechanisms are terrible. And the final thing, of course, is money. I mean, the thing about the Labour Party, of course, so you look at okay, you can look at the various parties, but obviously Labour Party is where this all comes from. Is that money is all centralised now? In this, of course, there's not a word about where money goes, or how it's spent or any of this stuff. I mean, is it a case that the branch gets money? The branch can employ people. How is the bureaucracy of the party constituted? Who controls it? Is it all controlled from the MPs from the centre? Like the Labour Party bureaucracy, none of this is written down, of course, but I mean, obviously we can understand from reading through it that the whole thing will be run by the General Secretary. The General Secretary will appoint so and such and all the rest of it. And presumably everybody else as well. I mean, the thing is obviously that if the thing is going to get any sort of size or so on, it's going to employ quite a number of people. And the question is, okay, well, are all of these people going to be employed centrally by the General Secretary? In which case, of course, then is a bureaucratic machine which will be set up to fulfil the wishes of a centralised organisation. Now, I mean, none of this is clear, but you can see the way it's going. I mean, the question becomes, okay, well, how is it that you insert democracy, that the members can actually change stuff, that the thing actually operates in terms of, a democratic function of the membership, that officials and the organisation and elected officials, in particular councillors and MPs and so on, and the party bureaucracy itself is held accountable. And then, of course, money in terms of, is money distributed to branches? Is money held in different places? Is it the case that if the organisation has an income of X million quid, is that decentralised, or is it all, runs, the whole lot runs through the general secretary? In which case, the machine will be used in order to crush everybody else. So yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Matthew. Okay, so I'm going to call in Jeff next, and then after that, Soraya. I can see there's comrades contributing in the chat as well. Brian has said that he's written an article about the Norwich Assembly, I think it was, and that would be interesting to hear about that. Of course, comrades will have experience of assemblies and other meetings that they've been at so far, and have views as well on the documents themselves. And how we can, as Matthew says, steer things in a different direction. So I'd be really keen to hear from comrades about that. So, Jeff, come in.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
we can hear you.
Excellent. Right. I think Matthew's made a lot of useful points, and I see this as a very provisional body. First of all, the driver is a mass movement, 800,000 people signing up, even though the leadership managed to bugger that up pretty decisively by taking each other to court and then not taking each other to court in a way that made us look ludicrous, frankly. But what's going on is a mass movement against the power of capital. And that is what's driving all this. It's what drove the rise of Corbyn to power in the Labour Party. And it's why they acted so decisively to get rid of it. And what this gives us is an opportunity for revolutionaries to link up with this vast Labour left, which feels very strongly, but which has frankly a very low level of socialist understanding, which has decayed over decades. And it's our opportunity to win reformists to a much more radical body of policies, as Matthew pointed out, in a background of rising class conflict. That's the context across the world. So I don't see this as a permanent body. Our danger is if we're sectarian and we put forward ideas that are simply beyond people and rather dogmatically asserted, so that we break down into the sort of sectarianism that has cursed those people on the left of Labour. I think the Assemblies thing, again, it's dogmatically asserted and it's vaguely absurd. Assemblies, big local movements, come and go quite rapidly. They're very fluid, they take all sorts of forms, and what we need is to be sensitive to them, to their locality, to the moments, and so on, not lay down dogmatics about how they have to work. I think there's one other thing, that there is going to be a big conference. We've no idea who will be there. There may be some of us acting as participants, there may not. But we should have an intervention there in the form of meetings on the side to draw people in and discuss with them about what's going on. The sortition thing seems like a crazy way of doing it, with members who have a very low level of commitment. People have simply signed a form, and many of us have paid 50 odd quid. Not a high level of commitment. So I guess that the first effort to get people there through sortition will end up with a very low turnout. What happens then, God knows. So, as I say, I see this as a provisional step towards the formation of a much bigger revolutionary movement, which breaks down the traditional sectarianism. So thanks.
Thanks, Jeff. That was admirable timekeeping. I've got Soraya next, and then Brian, and then Gary. So I'll just call you in order. So Soraya.
My starting point is that we need a fundamental change in how society is organised. It clearly doesn't work under capitalism. And so I was very pleased that this new party was going to be formed, has kind of been formed. But without rehearsing what other comrades have said, there is concern. I certainly had concern in reading these papers and indeed in what's happened so far, because for a different party, which is how it's been launched, our party, your party, there hasn't been consultation, has there? There's been a complete lack of transparency in how things have happened. We don't know who controls the membership figures. We don't know how many people have joined, how many of those who signed up expressing an interest in something different. And of course, that's obvious that people are fed up with the way things are. But that is also why this is so crucial. Now, I don't think, from the way it's starting out, I hope it can change, that it will be the answer for transforming, getting rid of capitalism, but it's an important development. And somebody posted about reform being a flash in the pan. I don't think it is. And that's Matthew talked about the move towards autocracy around the world. And reform will gain in the next elections because of the pitiful performance of the Labour Party, trying to outdo reform, trying to outdo the Tories, and not doing anything for working people and their families. So it's essential. I don't think it's reform is a flash in the pan. And if this party does not provide an alternative, appear to provide an alternative, people will go to reform and worse. So it's not an academic discussion. I'm not suggesting anybody said that so far, but it's just it's essential for if it's going to be our party, it's essential that the members have a full voice in what goes on. And if conference is sovereign, as it says in the papers, but the founding conference is not even with delegates, then of course it's a question of, well, what will happen at that conference? They talk about interim people working full time for the party and so on. But who will decide that? And we all know what it's like. Once people start off on a committee or working full time, it's very difficult to get that changed. It may be you don't want to, but it's very much a fait accompli. And well, these people are doing a good job, and so it'll carry on like that. So that's the concern that I have, and I think that there isn't an organised mass movement against the power of capital. There's a desire for something else, but it's really the role of the party, in my view, to accumulate the experience of the movement and to argue for a complete change of the way society is organised. That means getting rid of capitalism, and it means full democracy and full involvement. And the discussion on the programme, for example, how on earth are we going to decide on a programme? It seems that there's a contradiction between what this is purporting to be and in actual fact what it is or is planned to be, because it's very much, you talk about community, they talk about public and community ownership. What's public ownership is of everybody. What's community? It seems to be this idea of having branches and then community assemblies, as if to separate things and to divide people when we should all be working together. So I think somebody else just put, and I said, as Janet said, I want this to succeed, but I do think you can't ignore the problems there are. as somebody put, you can't start with a mass of non-revolutionaries, I think, on the issue of changing society. But that if we had a mass of revolutionaries, we'd already have changed society. So it's the question of we haven't. People are looking for change. And how do we, I say we, I hope comrades here agree, they may not, but as those who are socialists, communists, wanting to get rid of capitalism, how do we engage to say, well, actually, we need to completely, you can't tinker with capitalism. You've got to get rid of it completely and engage people. And I very much hope that we do get a say in the party and that there is democracy so that it isn't a damp squib, which then leaves the road open even more to reform and its ilk.
Thanks very much, Soraya. So, Brian, I'm going to call you in next. Did you feel like the assembly that you went to was democratic? Did you feel like you were consulted? If not, why not? Or if yes, what was good about it? Go ahead.
Yeah, we were the first assembly, as you well know. About 180, 190 people, broken into groups of 10. It meant that there could be no collective decision making. It meant that some groups disagreed on the same topic. Most people who were politically inexperienced came away and thought that it was rather good. But I want to talk about my article because it's been read by quite a lot of people and been circulated quite widely. It talks about all the areas where the centre can control us on the basis of the 4 documents. So first of all, the conference. There's going to be no vote on leadership, no confidence vote on the people that have shared 700,000 people, because we're down to 100,000 evidently from 800,000. Secondly, all the information fed from the assemblies is advisory. The only way to amend documents is through the portal. Now, that portal doesn't exist. It's very elusive. It's evidently the victim of the factional fight going on in London, which is really convenient because without that portal, without amendments, it's going to be a Mogadon conference, very calm, very peaceful. And that's, I think, what the bureaucratic element in the leadership want. The second thing is, even if conference agrees the options, and that's the only thing that conference can agree, the options that have been put in those 4 papers, the centre can still amend it. Contained very brazenly within the document is the words, the centre will finish off, do the final part, change the word final to amendment, and then you have the centre has the right to amend whatever conference agrees. And so I hope you'll read my article. It goes through all the areas where they can control it from the centre, including the CEC, because you see, we'll only have say over 7 of the 16, because 9 of those seats, 2 are reserved for MPs, 2 are reserved for party officers, and up to 5 are reserved for these, I don't know, these fictitious groups that they're talking about. So I hope you all read that article and assimilate it. My whole point is this: it's no use talking about a clash of programs yet. If we lose this fight about democracy in your party, it just becomes another bureaucratic outfit and will be squashed. Our voice won't be heard. So I think, and I appeal to all comrades, let's focus on the fight for democracy within the party rather than for progress. I'm done.
Thanks very much, Brian. So several comrades were asking where they could find your article, your report of the assembly. You posted it in the chat, I think. So comrades, just scroll up. You will find it there, and I'm sure people would like to read that. So Gary and then Richard, you've both been waiting very patiently. So Gary, go ahead.
Thanks, Ed. So I dialed in tonight because I was keen to hear what all your experiences were and thoughts are about what can be done. Because I feel that this is pretty dire. It is astonishing what they're getting away with. I mean, this party is emerging with less democracy and less roots in the working class than the Labour Party had, and that's not saying a great deal. It is an exercise in manipulation and control, and it looks like they're getting away with it, right? And I think that everything that's been said about the four documents is absolutely right. But what I'm concerned about is the process that we're going through as well. It seems to be quite impossible to make any kind of meaningful alternative proposals and get them fairly heard. I mean, the assemblies, as people have talked about, are just, in inverted commas, consultative. They're exercises in contempt and abuse, if you ask me. That you sit in groups of, like 8 or 10 people and talk to each other, and then everything you said gets forgotten about the moment you leave the room. The conference is in 4 sessions, and a quarter of the attendees of conference will sit in each of those sessions, and they'll cover the same ground, and God knows what kind of conclusions and decisions that can come to. The formation of branches is kicked into the indefinite long grass. I mean, the current date they're giving us is the end of March next year. Who knows if that will actually initiate branches then? The selection of candidates for local elections and for any parliamentary by-elections will be made in the meantime by the independent MPs, which is terrifying, to be honest, if you're thinking about actually mounting any kind of electoral challenge. So, I mean, I've got to a point where I can't see the point in participating in the regional assembly. I mean, apart from anything else, I can't imagine anything more morale sapping and dull than sitting in a regional assembly. Who knows who will get picked by sortition to go into the conference, but they won't have an influence over anything by being there, as far as I can see. The first opportunity, as far as I can see, that where we'll actually have an opportunity to get traction and mobilize and influence people is in a leadership election. And so thinking about what can we actually do, I mean, I think we have to ask ourselves, should we just be passively following their rules, or should we be almost sort of taking direct action in the forums that they're creating, like the assemblies and the conference? There doesn't seem to be any kind of appetite for doing anything like that, but it feels to me like that's what's needed right now to challenge them. And then or should we just sit back and wait for an opportunity to actually do something, which, as I say, is probably not until the leadership elections and then the formation of branches. I mean, one thing I would say is that these 4 documents and the processes being followed are profoundly hostile to the working class. And actually, all the talk about assemblies and community outreach and all this sort of thing is basically about encouraging the party to be a party of liberal do-gooders and a party which gets capitalism off the hook and gets imperialism off the hook. Actually, also a party that gets Zionism off the hook. And so I'm not even sure that if this party is successful as it stands, that would be a good thing. So I don't know, when the comrade talked about the need for us not to be sectarian. I mean, looking at my own experience trying to get involved and do things in my local proto-branch of your party here in Withington in Manchester, South Manchester, it's like, it's not about being sectarian. It's about how you talked to people who are completely on board with the kinds of ideas that are behind this constitution, who think that the job of your party is to do food banks and outreach work on local council estates. I mean, great to go out and knock on doors in council estates, but not to do liberal do-gooding. We should be talking politics and fighting and campaigning and struggling for local issues, and that's not what they have in mind. So there's actually very little appetite to try and form any kind of democratic functioning branch locally. And the main energy that came into our area was from some young people. I mean, and credit to them, they were very energetic and enthusiastic, but they didn't want a local branch. What they wanted to do was to organize an exciting rally for local students and get Sultana along to speak, which they did, and it was an energetic meeting. It was much better than I expected, but it had nothing to do with forming a democratic local organization. So I don't know what we do. I'm interested in what other people's thoughts are, but right now it's very difficult to grab hold of anything, and something needs to be grabbed hold of. Thanks.
Thanks, Gary. Richard, you're next. Oh, you're still on mute, Richard. Richard.
Hello there. I feel
Do you
as
want
though
to start again?
yes, I feel as though that I no need to say anything after what Gary has just said, because I feel completely on all fours with him. But I've got one or two slightly different things to say, which so I'll continue. I think Nick started off in the right place by saying that Corbyn and company almost certainly want to reinvent the Labour Party of 1945, and presumably he wants to, in talking about that kind of Labour Party, people want to summon images of the NHS to our mind, but leave out most of the story or all the backstory, because of course we know that Galbraith secured a great loan from the Americans in 1945 precisely by reminding them that the Red Army was on the Rhine, and unless they funded a health service in Britain, British workers who had who now knew how to fight, or certainly the males did, might be more tempted by the image of the societies the Russians or the Soviets were constructing in the East, and that a health service was needed to bolster capitalism in the West. And of course, Attlee's government was the government of the intervention in Greece. It was the government of the terrible campaign in Indonesia. It was the government that saw the horrendous departure of India from the empire. It saw NATO established with Attlee as one of the main drivers of NATO. And of course, it saw Attlee as Prime Minister introduce the British atomic bomb without any discussion in Cabinet or in Parliament. So that's Attlee's Labour Party, the Labour Party that these characters think is so great. It's obvious that a party with a leadership that looks to Attlee is never going to take us to socialism. The most their socialism can consist of is, as Gary reminded us, it's good works, charitable works on housing estates and perhaps in street collections, and nothing more than that. The Labour left when in the days when there was a Labour left, and I think Sultana still represents that tradition, spoke of socialism as though you were laying stepping stones, one step each time, small steps, moving us towards a socialized society. Obviously, a benchmark of a key indicator of socialism for people in that tradition has been nationalization. 50% nationalized major industry, that's not socialism. 100% nationalized industry, of course that's socialism, because that's what the USSR was. But of course, that's not socialism. And the fact that comrades can be confused about this is one of our difficulties. And in Britain, a 100% nationalisation along the lines of the National Coal Board, all the institutions that the 1945 Labour government gave us, would not have anything to do with socialism either. The working class were not in power, would not be in power in such a system, either in society or in workplaces or in any workplaces. The workers would still trudge to work each day, clock on, be told what to do, what the targets were, they would be working under the law of value. So it seems to me it's misconceived to entertain any notion that socialism can be reached through an accumulation of minor let's do better changes. Socialism requires a qualitative break with class society. Socialism means a complete upturning of the social relations of production. So why on earth are we even considering working with your party? It seems to me that if within your party we, the Marxists, maintain the right to organize independently and to state our politics clearly and vocally, then there is every purpose in being in your party as a forum where we would meet many workers and we could express our ideas. But unless we secure that right, and securing that right will require your party to seriously adopt, to seriously take democracy seriously within its own organization, which it seems very far from doing at the moment, then I see no point in being in your party. Thanks.
Thanks, Richard. I'm going to chair myself in briefly, and then there'll be time for one or two more comrades, and I want to give Nick the chance to come back, of course, and respond to the discussion. So I think where I am with all of this, it is, of course, we start with our politics and we start with what's necessary rather than what we think is realistic. And of course, what's necessary is communism and communist politics. And then, of course, that really quickly leads you into a consideration of what you have to work with. And what's in front of us in your party is, at least in theory, a huge mass of people who expressed an interest in it, 800,000 people. But as has been mentioned by other comrades, seems like, well, certainly not that many have been signed up as members. The leadership and its different factions are highly culpable in that, in my view, and I think that's right, and I think we should say it. But in terms of the people who are members and beyond that, the people who are still interested, are they up for a fight? Well, clearly they're up for some kind of a fight, a working class led fight back against the policies of Starmer. They're revolted by the policies of the Starmer government, by its support for genocide and all the rest of it. But in terms of a fight within the left or within your party, I think, frankly, the people are terrified of that. People are scared and uncertain about what it means to have contestation of ideas, open political differences, arguments. For a lot of people, it's something that doesn't come naturally to them. And they think that it's the same thing as factionalism or destructive behavior. And they don't know how to deal with it, and they don't really want any part of it. Of course, for many people, that comes from perhaps a good place, a well-meaning place. People want to think the best of their comrades. They want to assume good faith. And so they end up in a place where they don't want to acknowledge, for example, that the people currently leading your party are many of the same people who really did their best to put a lid on the democratization of the Labour Party. They sanctioned the shutdown of Momentum's democratic structures. They blocked open selection at Labour Party conference. It leads to a place where people willfully blind themselves to all of these things. And I think all we can do is patiently and calmly point these things out and explain what's necessary, what your party will have to adopt in terms of policies, but also structures in order to succeed and fulfill its objectives and bring about the change that people are hoping for. I think my take on it is that while the opportunities are really limited at this point in time, probably the best we have within your party, and I hear what other people say about questioning whether your party is in fact worth it at all. I think on balance it still is. And within that, how can we best affect change? Probably it's within the proto-branches, because I'm of the view, and other comrades have spelled this out as well, that the assemblies, the regional assemblies, are really a sort of an exercise to make it look as though people are listening. I think that's really all it amounts to. I don't think it's a way of channeling democratic power from the bottom up. If it were, then those assemblies would be empowered to take decisions, and those decisions would go somewhere and mean something. Instead, it's just a sort of talking shop so that people can feel like they've been heard bluntly. I wish that weren't the case, but I do think that's the truth, and we have to say it. In contrast to that, we have the proto-branches, which are far more local. They're the result of organic enthusiasm and activity. There's lots of problems and flaws with them, that they have the potential of genuine democratic structures and politics, open discussion, building real bonds of solidarity and accountability with each other, people who you know, people who are, live near to you, involved in the same struggles you are. And that's really it. They have the potential to be based on common action in our common struggle. And that's really where we need to start thinking about how we can focus our efforts, and focusing on that as the forum for advancing our arguments about what policies and what structures we need. So I'm going to leave off there. I can't see any comrades indicating to speak. If anybody wants to come in with a brief contribution, or a question, or just a comment on the discussion, there's still a minute or two if anybody would like to come in. But I'm not seeing any hands raised. That being the case, perhaps if I hand over to Nick again to respond and sum up.
Okay, well, thanks, Ed, and thanks to everybody for really interesting and informative contributions and arguments. And I suppose to sum up an answer to some of the points that have been raised is that the points that have been made in this meeting and the arguments that have been made both politically and about democracy need to be made to the audience that your party has. So I'm a Marxist. I'm a communist in the true sense of the word. That is, not a Stalinist. I'm a Marxist as I interpret Marx and Engels and their writings, seeking to establish a stateless, classless society through the expropriation of the capitalist class, and therefore the eradication of classes and the eradication of exploitation. And the only force in society that can do that is the working class. And the working class will only do that when it understands that that's what it needs to do. And so therefore, those of us that think along those lines, we've got a big job to do. We've got to educate other workers and politically conscious workers, but who've not yet drawn those conclusions. We've got to persuade them, convince them, educate them as to what the transformation of society would be, how it could come about, what it would necessitate, as Richard Harris explained, and how it is not what is set out in the political statement that underpins your party. And nobody from a communist or a Marxist background could mistake the policy and the program of your party, or the policy and program of the leadership of your party, as in any way being capable of resolving the problems that we face, which are problems of capitalism. I mean, you can forgive people for reading the political statement and coming away and thinking quite enthusiastically, well, that's good, that's what I agree with that. Because it's sort of like a how to put it? I'm going to say a sort of snake oil salesman. It says things dressed up in sort of very good but vague language that obfuscates what it's really about. I'm just going to quote a few things in the political statement, and I suppose in doing so, I'm not completely disagreeing with Brian, but because I do think that the question of democracy is absolutely important. But I don't think that we can drop the political arguments in order just to concentrate on democracy. We've got to try and do both. And in fact, my position would be that we're going to be more likely to win people to our arguments by explaining the sort of program that we need to change society and win them to us and to Marxism or communism, socialism on the basis of the need to end capitalism. And I put it pithily, I suppose, that we want a party that does not aim to manage capitalism, but to abolish it. And social democracy, Corbyn, and I would put Zara Sultana in the same bracket, although she's more enthusiastic and more dynamic than Corbyn, and she uses more radical phraseology. But the program is essentially the same, and it's there in the document. If you look, it says here that your party shares in the worldwide opposition to a global system of imperial domination, colonization, and exploitation. So on the surface, you read that and you say, yeah, that's great. But then you ask the question, well, what does it actually mean? It shares in the worldwide opposition to a global system of imperial domination. It doesn't even say imperialist domination. So what is imperial domination? And my reading of it, and perhaps I'm being unfair, is it suggesting that there's a form of capitalism without imperialism that would be acceptable. And that's wrong. You cannot have capitalism in the modern period, and this has been the case for almost 200 years, hasn't it? You can't have capitalism without imperialism and a struggle for the leading role in world capitalism. And that's now developing into, well, we've got outright tariff wars and likely, possibly, to develop into hot wars involving USA and its allies and against China, which to me is another capitalist power, developing, growing capitalist power into a potential World War III and potentially with nuclear weapons. So when it says earlier on in the document, if I can find it, the party stands for freedom for the many. Well, who's going to oppose that? Freedom for the many. We can't have freedom for the many under capitalism because workers are tied to the workplace. And if they don't work, they starve. And if they do work, they're making profit for Jeff Bezos or whoever it is. And there's no free. They're dominated by arbitrary power expressed through the law, the courts, the prisons, the army, the police, all of whom are in the service of the capitalist class. So we need to have discussions about, well, what do we do about all those institutions, the form of the state and so on, and argue against the idea that you can have a sort of fair, nice capitalism that doesn't have nasty, horrible police and armies that go around committing genocide, as Gary pointed out. But it says, the party stands for freedom of the many from poverty. Can you have capitalism without poverty? War? Can you have capitalism without war? Economic struggle will inevitably break out into hot rivalry, competition for strategic geographic areas, for minerals, for water, for access, for markets, for labour. If you want a society where there is no war, you have to fight for a society where there is no class differentiation, where there is no exploitation, therefore where there is no capitalism at all. But as I said at the beginning of my in my first contribution, it goes on this: it says, both at home and abroad. Well, you think about it, it doesn't mean anything, does it? Your party stands against the war economy. Well, when Jeremy Corbyn ran the Labour Party, was the leader of the Labour Party, the manifestos didn't talk about getting rid of Trident and nuclear weapons. Your party stands against the war economy, and then it says this, and the neoliberal capitalist order, which fuels the climate crisis and grotesque levels of inequality. It's not just neoliberalism. This is a common approach of many on the left, that they're against neoliberalism. So what does it mean? They're against the incarnation of capitalism that emerged in the middle of the 1970s, which in the advanced capitalist countries led to the deterioration and the removal and the undermining of the post-war consensus. Richard explained how that came about, that it was fear of what would happen if they didn't make these concessions. But you go back to Harold Wilson and Callaghan and the IMF loan to Britain in the 1970s, and you go to Thatcher and Reagan and privatization and what became known as neoliberalism, which was another form of capitalism trying to squeeze the maximum out of the working class by intruding on all of those parts of capitalism that had been taken into state control, and they wanted them opened up for greater production of capital, of profit rather. So as Matthew and others have pointed out, the room for reforms is greatly diminished. The only way that you could get reforms is actually through mass struggle, almost mass revolutionary struggle, where the capitalist class would have to consider whether to make the reforms in order to prevent losing the whole caboodle. But outside of mass struggle, can you point to any advances in living standards, in successful reforms being obtained rather than limiting the way that they're being undermined in the last 20 years in Britain? Has there been a successful struggle against privatization? So the room for these reforms is diminished, and the idea which is being sold really by Jeremy Corbyn and the people around him, that somehow all we need is nice sounding words and a fairer form of capitalism, which has reminiscences of Ed Miliband, if you remember, where he and David Cameron were arguing about who would implement the fairer capitalism, then it's hogwash. And so in your party, the reason, in my opinion, why communists, Marxists, socialists should be in your party, as I agree with Jeff on this, if not on everything that he said, but is to try to reach those people. These people are either already developing their political understanding or they're awakening to it. Why do we leave them only to the arguments and the blandishments of the social democrats, the liberals, the do-gooders, as Gary called them? Because that's what social democracy is in reality. It's a form of liberal capitalism. It's, we don't like what capitalism does in terms of making people poor and unhappy. And we don't like the fact that capitalism makes people ill and they can't get the medication and so on. So we just got to do something about it so that we feel better. No, what we need to do is eradicate the system that causes those plagues, those devastations, and that means getting rid of capitalism. So if there's 800,000 people that initially expressed an interest, that must, in my opinion, contain a large swathe of people that want an answer to what causes poverty, to what causes unemployment, to what causes the blight in the high street with all the shops that are closed and so on. And if we allow reform and the far right to make their arguments and blame the easy target, which is the migrants, the other, the outsider, and so on, then we're not doing our job. And social democracy will not be able to compete. It may temporarily win people back, but when they try to implement their program and it's obstructed and it fails, then where will people turn? If there is no strong Marxist, communist pole of attraction, there's a real danger, as in the 1920s and 30s, that people will turn further to the right. And so therefore there's an obligation for us as socialists, as communists, as Marxists, in the way that we use the terms, to organize. And in my opinion, at this stage, we've got the potential, at least, of finding some route to some, even if it's a limited number, of people who are looking at your party, who might be enthusiastic. But of those 800,000, it does seem that like 700,000 have become disillusioned or demoralized quite quickly. Could we, by putting out material, by putting out articles, by putting out better produced material on YouTube or on other channels, podcasts and so on, with the resources, could we find ways of reaching some of those people? How do we reach the youth in the universities, in the colleges, but more importantly, perhaps in the workplaces? How do we reach them? Your party may not for very long be the main area where we have to place our work. But for the time being, whilst these arguments are taking place, I think that we should put our arguments forward and fight for them. And we should show that actually communists, real genuine communists, are the most consistent Democrats in the workers' movement. And that means in your party. Why is it, people, we would hope, would ask, why is it that it's the communists, these Marxists, that people are saying shouldn't be in your party, are the ones that are fighting for democratic rights, that are fighting for the members' right to criticize, the right to put arguments forward, the right to amend? And we're the ones that are pointing out the lack of transparency, the lack of openness. We still don't know who wrote these documents. We still don't know who wrote these documents. We don't know who's being employed. We don't know how much they're being paid. Clearly, people are being paid, but we don't know. So we should make those arguments, and we don't make them because we want to carp or criticize unnecessarily. We make them because if we are to change society, we need a mass force, and that is the working class. And we need a working class that is prepared to go the distance to confront the power of the capitalist state, the capitalist class, and to carry through the change that is necessary. That won't be done if we tell them that all they need to do is sit at home and click a button. We want people involved in the discussions and the debates to enthuse them to get stuck in the campaigns and the activity that people are talking about. But on this question of assemblies, surely the point of a political party is not to go into the local community and just say, what do you think? Of course, that's part of it. But what happens if the community turns around and says, well, get rid of all these asylum seekers? The role of a political party is to try to persuade people of its ideas, not to try to win support on the basis of the lowest common denominator. And so that's why we keep coming back to the question of the program, the program, the program. Is the aim of this party to abolish capitalism? No, it isn't. We should argue that it should be. and we explain why it should be. So it's the program. And I don't think we should lower that flag in favor of democracy or the democratic arguments. We should make both. But, and this is a question for all of us in this room, because to one degree or another, we've all got doubts or criticisms which are shared about whether your party is going to succeed, whether it's going to be a party in which we will even be allowed to participate. What do we do now, and what do we do if that happens in the future? We need to be organized. And that means those of us who agree on the general political approach should be together in an organization, in your party, in a faction, and argue as a faction. And we should try to work with other organizations of a similar nature together collectively to strengthen our arguments. If the leadership succeed and they get rid of the Marxist left, and the SWP are kicked out, and the Socialist Party are kicked out, and the RCP are kicked out, they will have their organizations still. We have to ask the question, because most of us here, I think, are perhaps individuals, independent communist, socialist, Marxists. We have to ask the questions, what will we do? Because if we're passionate and convinced about the need to change society, we need to be organized, need to discuss in the same way as we've been arguing about the need to discuss the constitution of your party. We need to discuss what we should do practically. What program should we put forward? How do we best present our arguments? So I hope to see all of you and more, if possible, at further meetings. And if you're organising meetings, let us know about them and we'll come to yours. With that, I'm going to say thank you very much for coming, and I'll see you again soon.
Thanks, comrades. So next meeting, 10th of November, how do we stop the climate catastrophe? So 2 weeks' time, 7:30 as always. And then 2 weeks after that, 24th of November, what should we say about refugees, immigration, and international solidarity? Go to our website, talkingabout.socialism.org. You can register for the meetings there, and hope to see you again very soon. So thanks very much, everybody, and have a good evening.